Year 3 and welcome to Tuesday's literacy lesson. I'm chilly this morning. I put a scarf on and everything. It's a bit chilly. Hopefully you really enjoyed yesterday's lesson and starting to think about what makes a diary and all the different features of a diary. Have any of you decided to start writing one? That would be really interesting, whether you started to document what happens in your lives. That would be really interesting if you've been inspired to start writing your own diary. Today, we're going to start thinking about writing a diary, but in the we're putting ourselves in the shoes of an evacuee. And the first part we're going to be thinking about today is what it would be like for an evacuee to live through the Blitz. So all that information, there's so much information that you now know about the Blitz from our topic lessons and from our Professor Pete lessons. There is so much information you have about the Blitz. That is where we're going to start today. So let me share my screen with you. There we go. So we're going to start thinking about the emotional vocabulary that we are going to use to describe how children felt during World War II. So we're really going to think about those emotions and how we would write about our emotions in a diary. So to be successful, we are going to be able to identify how a person's emotion will change depending on events which they experienced. So that's saying when you write a diary, you talk about your emotions and you talk about different things, but your emotions will change during those events. And we're going to talk about those today. We're also going to show a really good understanding of different ways to describe emotions. We are not going to have a diary that says, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm sad. We're going to think about the vocabulary and have it as far more interesting and a deeper knowledge of those different emotions. Okay, and we're also going to empathize with children of World War II. And that empathize means you really understand how those children were feeling. And actually, lots of children would have had different experiences. So maybe you need to decide, are you going to be an evacuee who's excited about leaving London? Or are you going to be an evacuee who was really scared and really worried about leaving London? Or are you going to be an evacuee that was both? Okay, and that is about the different emotions that the children would have been having. So yesterday we were talking about all the different things that we would find in a diary. Okay, remember, it's written in the first person. So we have I, me, we. Okay, all those things that show the reader that you are writing about yourself. We talked about how it happened. We write in the past tense. Okay, we write about things that are happening. We might write about things that are going to happen in a way that we're excited about them and we're looking forward to them. And we would signpost that something might be happening tomorrow and we were excited about it, but we would still review that event after it happened. Diaries are all about thoughts and feelings about the events. For some people, it's the only way they get to talk about things. So some children might not want to talk to their parents. Do you remember yesterday in the extract that we read from Jan Pollard? She said, didn't she, that during the war, people didn't show their emotions very well. It was called a stiff upper lip. And it meant that you were very brave about things and you didn't really talk about your feelings at all. A diary would have been a way to express those feelings that you felt you couldn't talk about in the open. The second two link quite nicely, don't they? It's all about writing in a chronological order. So writing in time order, but using those phrases after lunch, before bed, to tell the reader how it is happening and what part of the day. Because you wouldn't write after lunch and then write about what you had for breakfast. So it's all about writing in a chronological order. But there's one thing that we're going to also include in our diary writing, okay? And that's our historical knowledge. Unfortunately, we're not writing about what happened last week in your lives. We need to show that historical knowledge and write about what happened to children during World War II. And we are like sponges. We have picked up so much of that knowledge from lots of different places, and we're going to include all of that, just like we did with Professor Pete. We're going to include all of that knowledge in our diary writing. So we're going to have 3 separate extracts that we are going to write. And by Friday, we will have written all of these. And the first one, we're going to write about what it was like being in London during the Blitz as a child. That is your first diary entrance. Extract. We're then going to write about thoughts and feelings about being evacuated. And that's a little bit that we looked at yesterday in the extract that we looked at from the evacuee diary. You've a lot of thoughts and feelings in there. What do you feel about being evacuated? Are you excited about being evacuated? You don't know where you're going, so maybe you've got some thoughts and feelings about that. And then the third extract is going to be arriving in the country, in the countryside, and meeting your host family. And again, depending on our experience, we might decide that we have the most lovely of experiences in the countryside, and that it relates to your story last week about the boy in the beanstalk. They might be a family that really treat you really well and welcome you into the family and feed you really well, and you have quite a nice time in the countryside with your evacuee family, host family. You might decide that unfortunately you're with a family that don't treat you as nicely as they should. And we learnt yesterday about being an evacuee, didn't we? And we said at the time that sometimes families were forced to take in evacuees because they felt it was their national duty, but they didn't really want to take the children in, but maybe they had a big house with lots of empty rooms. So they felt that they had to, or they had pressure put on them because they had they could take them in. Okay, so that's another bit where you get to decide which way your evacuee will go. But today we're going to think about life in the Blitz. And you have seen so many of these pictures. I've tried to find some new ones, but there's only so many that show different things. But here, we've got some children who are obviously sat next to a building that has collapsed. We've got a warden here who looks like he might have saved a child from the wreckage. We've got some boys here who actually, this one here particularly, looks like he's quite all right, doesn't he? He looks like he's quite happy sipping that cup of tea. But what's happened behind him? Why is he outside on a sofa drinking tea? And this one here, this is of the underground shelters. And that will be familiar to lots of you from when we did our Professor Pete story. So this is the one that we're going to look at today. Okay, we're going to look at all these, but this is the one I'm going to think about for our next task. And I want you to think about how you would feel being down there. How would you feel being one of those children that's in the underground shelter? You've heard the air raid sirens. You run down to the underground shelter, maybe because you haven't got an Anderson shelter, or maybe because it's the nearest safe place. And you run down there and you're sat with possibly hundreds of other people, and you can hear the bombs going off outside. Okay, I want you to pause and think about how you would feel. So here's our picture. Okay, and some of you might have been saying that you felt scared. Okay, that's quite a good word. But can we think of better words that mean the same thing, okay, but are different words than scared? Because you might be using scared a lot in your writing this week. So if we can have lots of different words that mean the same thing, this might make our writing a little bit more interesting. Scared is a good word, and you probably would feel scared. But you might feel afraid. They mean the same thing, but it's just a different word. It's another word. You might be afraid of what's happening. You might be fearful, full of fear. Okay? Again, it means scared, but it's a better word. It's a more interesting word for our readers. You might be petrified. Okay? If we're thinking about scared and petrified, scared is kind of here. Petrified, you might be really, really scared about what is happening. Okay? But petrified is such a good word. Such a good word to think about. So that's one emotion you could have had down in the underground shelter. Another emotion that you could have had is that you were glad. You were glad you were in the safety of the underground shelter. But what other words could we use that mean glad, but are just that little bit more interesting? Pause the video here and have a think of different words that we could use instead of glad. Now I've had a think, okay, and I'm sure you've come up with lots of words as well. Maybe you're relieved. Oh, I'm in the shelter. Okay. You're just so relieved. You're glad that everyone's safe, but you're relieved. You sort of have that physical, that everything's okay. You might feel sheltered. You might feel that you're in the safety of the shelter and you're nice and sheltered from what is happening above the underground station. You might feel jovial. What on earth does jovial mean? And why would you be feeling it in an underground station? Have a think. Jovial. Well, jovial means full of joking and full of fun. And actually, quite often in the underground shelter, it was quite fun for the people that were there. And I think I've talked about before, there would be people that would take their pillows and blankets and everything, and they would go down there every night, maybe because they didn't have an Anderson shelter or a Morrison shelter. And they would take instruments down there, and you would hear people playing instruments and people singing. You might have people reading poetry. You might have people taking board games down there. Now, it wouldn't be happening right at the moment that this picture was taken, but at some time during the night, a train would go through and there would be ladies on the train handing out tea and cake to people for you to buy. So there would be children looking forward to the train that would come through. So for sometimes, and on some occasions, actually being down there with lots of people would be quite a jolly place to be. Not all the time though, but maybe you were feeling jovial. Maybe you saw some of your school friends down there and sat playing noughts and crosses whilst you were waiting for the all clear. So it's different ways of saying the same thing, but we are enhancing our language. We are up-leveling our language so that we don't use happy and sad all the time. We need a because, okay? When we're talking about our feelings, we need to say why we feel like that. We need to say why something made us feel the way it did. Okay, and all the time we are using that historical knowledge. So I would like you to pause it here and think about the different emotions that you would have at that picture on the underground station. I've written a sentence using the words that I thought about, and I've put it into a sentence. The air raid siren went off, and so I had to go to an underground shelter. I felt glad I was in the shelter. Okay, Mrs. Pledger, not a bad first effort. Not great though, is it? Let's think of different ways I can make that sentence a little bit better. So thinking about our time connectives, thinking about our chronology, when am I writing my diary? Well, I'm probably writing it in the evening, either just before I go to bed, or maybe when I'm in bed and I've got a torch, or I've got a candle rather, and I'm being able to write my diary while I'm snuck in bed. So when did it happen? Well, it happened, and can you see I've got it here? I'm hoping that's why I'm sat half in the dark, so that you can see what's on here. So I'm hoping that you can see it. But it happened earlier today. So we could add a nice sentence opener. Let's move that a little bit closer. I'm hoping that you can see it. Okay. Earlier today, the air raid siren went off. Well, straight away, that makes it a more interesting sentence, doesn't it? I'm talking about something that happened to me earlier today. The air raid siren. Oh, Mrs. Pledger, come on. We can make that more interesting. What is the air raid siren? Well, for starters, it's loud. Could we even make that into a double adjective? The loud piercing or loud booming. There we go. I'm describing what it looks like. Earlier today, the loud booming air raid siren went off. Where are we coming from? Let's put some historical knowledge in there. Where could we have been? We could have been at school. I'm going to say I was visiting my grandma. So here, the loud booming air raid siren went off as we were coming home from my grandma's. As we were coming home from grandma's. That sounds a bit better, doesn't it? The air raid siren went off as we were coming home from grandma's. I've extended that sentence. I've added a clause in there saying where I was. Okay. I had to go to an underground shelter. Well, why did I have to go to the underground shelter? Because it was closer than my home, which was closer than home. Okay. How did I get to the underground shelter? Did I stroll? Did I skip? Probably not if that air raid siren's going off. I rushed. Earlier today, the loud booming air raid siren went off as we were coming home from grandma's. So I rushed to go to an underground shelter, which was closer than home. Not bad, Mrs. Pledger. Pause the video here and see if you can come up with a sentence. What I want you to think about, though, is all those different features of a diary. I'm going to have another think about my sentences as well and see what we come up with. Pause the video here and see if you can write a sentence about rushing to the underground station. So I've had another think. And it wasn't too bad. That was better, but I've had another thing. Have a listen to my short passage. Earlier today, the loud air raid siren went off as we were coming home from visiting Granny in the next street. I rushed to the underground shelter because it was closer than our Anderson shelter at the bottom of our garden. I was so relieved to finally get to the platform and knew I would be safe and sheltered from the danger until we heard the all clear. Better than the first sentence, isn't it? Better than that sentence. And that sentence was okay, but we can add our expertise into the sentence, can't we? Now, have I used all the features of a diary? Well, let's have a look. Have I written in first person? I have, haven't I? Because I've said I rushed to the underground shelter. Well done. Have I written in past tense? Well, I was relieved. I was sheltered. I was talking about something that had happened in the past. So yes, I have written in the past tense. Have I included thoughts and feelings about the events that I'm writing about? Yes, I was relieved. I knew I would be safe and sheltered. I've talked about how I felt. Have I used those time connectives? Earlier today, okay, I'm writing about something that has happened, and I'm writing about something that happened earlier today. I could have said earlier this afternoon. I could have said after school. I could have said just after lunch. Okay, but it's telling my reader when something happened. And have I included historical knowledge? I've included quite a bit of historical knowledge, I think, in this, haven't I? I've talked about the air raid siren. I've talked about the air raid siren. I've talked about going to an underground shelter because it was closer than the Anderson shelter at the bottom of our garden. So that's more historical information. I've talked about waiting to hear for the all clear. Okay, you wouldn't have gone out of that shelter until you heard the all clear. So that's another piece of historical information that I've used. I'm quite pleased with that sentence now. I want you to have a go at this picture. I would like you to have a go at thinking about how the children are feeling. Pick a child and have a go at writing how the children are feeling. Think about that word, the first word that comes into your mind, and then think, hang on a minute, do I know a better word than that? Hang on a minute, do I know an even better word for that? Pause your screen and have a go at thinking about some of the emotions that those children are feeling. Now, I'm not saying this is right, but they're probably feeling sad. They don't look particularly happy, do they? They don't look like they're off to a party. They look a little bit sad. They look a little bit unhappy. Different word means the same thing. Can we think of something better? They look tearful. They're full of tears. Chances are they probably are. They're full of sorrow. They are sorrowful. They probably are. Chances are, if they're sat in front of a building looking like that, there's been some bomb damage. Okay, they are probably really unhappy about something. But do you see how we've gone from sad to sorrowful? Okay, sad is a great word, but we can do better. Think about the emotions of these boys. Pause the video here and pick some emotions that you think the boys would be feeling. Start with a word and then build up and build up and build up to a word that you think is great. I think the boy who is sat second next to the boy in the cap, I think he looks quite happy. They don't look quite as sorrowful as the children in the last picture, do they? They might be quite grateful. They're grateful for the tea that they've been given. Okay, somebody's helped them out. They've let them sit on the sofa So they're quite happy. They're grateful for what they've been given. Chances are they're quite relieved. Okay, they're safe. They haven't been hurt. So they might be feeling relieved. I want you to pick one of those pictures, either the one with the boys, or the one with the 3 children. And I want you to have a go at writing a sentence that includes thoughts or feelings. But I want you to say why they feel like that. So including a because or a why. And remember, we're going to use some historical knowledge to include in our diary writing. So pause the video here and think about some sentences that you could write about one of those pictures. Okay, I chose the pictures of the 3 children. And I'm going to pretend that I'm talking about this picture and the event, but I'm going to talk about it in my diary. I was so tearful because last night's bombing raid had destroyed our neighbourhood, and I knew it would mean we would finally be evacuated. And that's quite a short sentence. But I've included a because. Okay, I've said why I'm tearful. So I've included my emotions. I've said when it happened. I'm writing about something that happened last night. The bombing raid happened last night. I can't write about a bombing raid before it's happened. I've written that it's happened in the past tense, destroyed our neighbourhood. I've written in first person. I've also included some historical knowledge about the bombing raid destroying the neighbourhood, and that would mean that children would be evacuated. Maybe their parents had kept them at home for as long as possible, but now it meant that they would have to leave. Okay, this is a bit where you talk about your thoughts because you now know that means you will be evacuated. Okay, your task for the rest of the morning for literacy, you have got 2 different scenes. You've got pictures of your first scene, and you can see straight away that this is children who are being evacuated. You can see that there's a boy and 2 girls, maybe they're your sisters, and they're having their labels checked by the policeman. You can see that there are lots of mums who are waving their children off, and the children are cramming through the window to say one last goodbye. There are boys all hanging out of the carriage in that picture. Maybe they are going through a town and they are waving at the people on the platform. And you can see in that last one, you have 3 boys there. And it looks like the teacher might be checking his fingernails to make sure he's nice and clean. So this would be the scene that you talk about when you are going to think about when you are being evacuated. And all I want you to have a go at is thinking about the emotions that you would be feeling. Start with that one emotion that you think about straight away and then develop. And I've put a document on the class webpage that might help you. But one word of warning, if you are choosing some of the words that are on the document, you need to know what they mean. And you need to be able to put them in your own sentence. So that is your I'm being evacuated. And then this one, this shows the pictures of the children arriving at their village or the place that they have been evacuated to. So you can see that they're getting little food parcels being handed out by the ladies, and they're all being checked in. And you can see that one little boy, he's got his cuddly toy under his arm, looks like a dog or something. Okay, so again, I want you to think about all the thoughts and feelings that you would have in these pictures. Okay, these children, they look quite happy, don't they? They're quite excited, but would you have the same feelings deep down? So I will stop sharing. There we go. So that is your task for today, Year 3. You are going to look at the pictures of the scenes of the evacuees on the train, and you're going to look at the scenes of the evacuees arriving in your village. I want you to think about all those different emotions that you might have. Okay, you could have some negative emotions where you're feeling worried and scared, apprehensive, and on the other side, you could have excited, Maybe you can't wait to get there and visit a new place. You've heard that there might be cows there. You've never seen a cow before, but that might make you a bit scared as well. So you are really going to think about all those different emotions today. Enjoy, and all of this will build up to your diary writing that we're going to start doing tomorrow. Bye, Year 3.